walked into Spider-Man Brand New Day expecting Peter Parker to face another villain. Someone stronger, smarter, more dangerous than anyone he had fought before. And as this movie continued, I kept waiting for that villain to reveal themselves. But they never really did. At least, not in the way I expected. And honestly, that disappointed me at first. I liked the movie. I understood why people were connecting with it. I even walked away thinking this might be the best solo Tom Holland Spider-Man movie. But something still felt like it was missing. Then my fiance pointed something out. Maybe this movie didn't need a traditional villain, because Peter was already fighting one, himself. Not because Peter Parker had suddenly become evil, but because everything he had been carrying, the grief, the fear, the anger, the loneliness, was slowly transforming him into someone he no longer recognized. And instead of confronting what was happening, Peter tried to suppress it. The inhibitor gave him control, or at least the illusion of it, because it never actually healed him. It only allowed Peter to keep functioning, without facing the part of himself that was falling apart. And the more he tried to bury that part of himself, the more dangerous it became, because this isn't just a story about Peter Parker physically becoming a monster. It's about what can happen to any of us when we treat our pain like something that needs to be hidden, instead of something that needs to be healed. Peter Parker's greatest enemy wasn't the monster he was becoming. It was the belief that he had to fight it alone. Peter has always believed that with great power comes great responsibility. But Brand New Day asks a much more uncomfortable question. What happens when responsibility becomes isolation? When protecting the people you love means never allowing them to truly know you? And what happens when the person who spends his life saving everyone else becomes too afraid to admit that he might need saving too? Part 1. The cost of letting people in. Peter Parker doesn't isolate himself because he wants to be alone. He isolates himself because experience has taught him that loving people comes with consequences. Peter has already watched the people closest to him pay the price for knowing Spider-Man. Aunt May lost her life. MJ lost her memories. Ned forgot the person who once considered him his best friend. And Peter was left carrying every memory, completely alone. That matters, because Peter's isolation doesn't begin as self-hatred. It begins as sacrifice. At the end of No Way Home, Peter makes the impossible choice to let everyone forget him, not because he stops loving them, but because he believes loving them from a distance is the only way to keep them safe. And for a while, that probably feels like responsibility. Peter tells himself that this is simply what Spider-Man has to do, that his happiness is a small price to pay if the people he loves get to keep living their lives. But sacrifice can become dangerous when you never allow it to end. By the time we meet Peter in Brand New Day, loneliness is no longer something that happened to him. It has become the way he lives. He works alone, he fights alone, he struggles alone. And even when it becomes clear that something inside him is changing, Peter's first instinct isn't to ask for help, it's to hide it. Because asking for help requires trust, and trusting someone means letting them close. For Peter, closeness has become another word for danger. That's what makes his relationship with MJ so painful. You can tell Peter wants to let her back in his life. He wants to tell her the truth. He wants someone to look at him and actually know who they're looking at. But every time Peter considers reaching out, he remembers what it cost the last time. Aunt May didn't die because Peter stopped caring. She died after becoming involved in this world. MJ wasn't hurt because Peter pushed her away. She was hurt because she stood beside him. So in Peter's mind, the lesson is obvious. The closer someone gets to him, the more vulnerable they become. And the movie refuses to pretend that fear is irrational. Because the moment Jean discovers Peter's identity, she goes after MJ. immediately. Peter's greatest fear is proven right. The people who know Spider-Man become weapons that can be used against Peter Parker. So when Peter keeps people at a distance, he isn't being cold. He isn't being selfish. He's terrified. Terrified that the moment someone chooses him, he'll eventually have to watch them suffer for it. Peter wants to be known, but he has convinced himself that being known is dangerous. He wants someone beside him, but he believes standing beside Spider-Man is a death sentence. And maybe that's the cruelest part of Peter Parker's life. He would gladly sacrifice himself to save someone, but he refuses to let anyone decide that he might be worth the same risk. Peter doesn't choose loneliness because it hurts less. He chooses it because he believes it will hurt only him. He thinks isolation is the price of responsibility. But the longer Peter remains alone, the more that isolation begins changing him, because loneliness may protect the people around him from Spider-Man, but it leaves Peter Parker completely unprotected from himself. Part 2. The Lie of Distance. Peter believes he has found a solution. If getting close to him puts people in danger, then he simply won't let anyone get close. No relationships, no partners, no one who knows that person beneath the mask. Because if nobody truly knows Peter Parker, then nobody can be used against Spider-Man. On the surface, it makes sense. Distance feels safe, predictable, controlled. Peter can keep an eye on MJ without pulling her back into his world. He can care about her without giving her another reason to become a target. He can love her without allowing her to love him back. But distance doesn't remove love. It only removes connection. Peter still worries about MJ. He still watches over her. He still carries every memory of the life they once shared. The only difference is that now he carries it alone. And I think that's the lie Peter has convinced himself to believe. That if he suffers quietly enough, everyone else will be okay. That his loneliness is somehow protecting them. But protection becomes complicated when the people you're protecting never get a choice. Peter decides MJ is better off without him. He decides she shouldn't know who he is. He decides the danger is too great before she ever gets the chance to decide for herself. And those decisions come from love, but they also come from fear. Peter isn't only protecting MJ, he's trying to control the consequences of loving her. Because control is easier than trust. Trust would mean telling her the truth. Trust would mean admitting that he's scared. Trust would mean giving MJ the freedom to look at every possible consequence and choose Peter anyway. But then Jean discovers his identity, and the movie does something important. It proves Peter's fear isn't imaginary. The moment Jean knows who Spider-Man really is, she goes after MJ, the person Peter has spent all this time trying to keep outside of his life. And suddenly, Peter appears to be right. This is exactly what he was afraid of. The moment someone connects Spider-Man to Peter Parker, the people Peter loves become leverage. His identity doesn't only reveal who he is, it reveals where he can be hurt. But there's another side to that. Because Peter has already pushed MJ away. She doesn't know the truth. She doesn't understand the danger surrounding her. She doesn't know why she has been chosen. Peter's distance didn't prevent her from becoming a target. It only ensured that she would become one without being prepared. That's the contradiction at the center of Peter's plan. He believes ignorance will keep MJ safe, but ignorance can also make her vulnerable. Because when MJ is close to Peter, she has information. She understands the risk. She can recognize the danger, and most importantly, she isn't facing it alone. Peter isn't wrong to be afraid. He's wrong to believe distance guarantees safety. Being close to Peter may put MJ in danger, but being far away doesn't remove that danger. It only removes Peter from her side when it arrives. And maybe that's what Peter has forgotten. MJ was never simply a helpless person waiting for Spider-Man to save her. She chose to stand beside him. She chose to help. She chose the risks that came with knowing him. Peter takes that choice away because he believes he knows what's best for her. And again, that comes from love. But love without trust can slowly become control. Peter wants to carry the entire burden himself. Because if something goes wrong, he wants to be the only person who pays for it. But relationships don't work that way. You can't protect someone by making every decision for them. You can't love someone fully while refusing to let them know you. And you can't build a life with another person while constantly deciding they'd be better off without you. Peter believes isolation is selfless. But the longer it continues, the more it becomes another way of avoiding the thing he fears the most: vulnerability. Not the vulnerability of being physically hurt. Peter faces that every night. The vulnerability of being seen. Of admitting that he doesn't have everything under control. Of letting someone close enough to see what he's becoming. And when Peter can no longer control the danger around him, he turns that need for control inward. He hides what's happening. He refuses to ask for help. And instead of understanding the part of himself that is changing, Peter finds a way to silence it. Because distance wasn't enough. Now Peter needs something else. Something that can keep the problem buried. Something that can make him feel normal, without forcing him to confront why he's falling apart. The inhibitor appears to give Peter exactly what he wants: control. But what Peter doesn't understand yet is that suppressing something isn't the same as healing it. Part 3. The inhibitor. One of my favorite ideas in Brand New Day isn't the transformation, it's the inhibitor. Because on the surface, it solves Peter's problems. The symptoms disappear. The monster goes quiet. Peter can keep pretending everything is okay. But that's exactly what makes it so dangerous. The inhibitor doesn't heal Peter. It only helps him avoid what he's becoming. And honestly, I don't think the inhibitor is really about Peter's transformation. I think it's about something much more human. All of us have our own inhibitors. Some people bury themselves in work. Some people distract themselves with entertainment. Some people throw themselves into the gym. Some people drink. Some people isolate themselves. Not because these things are always bad, but because sometimes they're easier than confronting what's actually hurting us. We convince ourselves that if we can just make the feeling disappear, then maybe the problem has disappeared too. And honestly, I see a lot of myself in Peter here. When I discover something I don't like about myself, or something that feels wrong in my relationship, my first instinct isn't always to talk about it. Sometimes I bury it. I convince myself I'll deal with it later, that I'm protecting the relationship, that I'm keeping the peace. But that's never what actually happens. The feeling doesn't disappear. It waits. It grows. Quietly, until one day, something small happens, and suddenly I'm reacting with anger that doesn't seem to match the moment. But it isn't about that moment. It's about everything I refused to deal with before it. That's Peter. Every time he reaches for the inhibitor, he isn't becoming healthier. He's becoming quieter. There's a difference. Because suppression isn't healing. Suppression is silence. And silence has a way of becoming pressure. Pressure doesn't disappear, it builds. Suppression isn't control, it's pressure. Peter thinks he's solving the problem, but every time he suppresses it, he gives himself one less opportunity to understand it. He never asks, why is this happening to me? He only asks, how do I stop it? And I think that's something a lot of us do. We spend so much time trying to eliminate uncomfortable emotions that we never stop to ask what those emotions might be trying to tell us. That's why I don't think the monster is actually Peter's greatest enemy. The monster is just a symptom. The real problem started long before Peter ever transformed. It started the moment he decided he had to carry everything by himself. Because the more Peter suppresses what's happening, the less he understands it. The less he trusts the people around him, the less he allows anyone to help. Until eventually, The very thing he spent the entire movie trying to contain becomes impossible to control. Peter believes the monster is the thing destroying his life. But maybe the monster was never the problem. Maybe it was the loneliness that created it. Part 4. The Monster Within. Every Spider-Man story asks the same question. What kind of hero will Peter Parker become? But Brand New Day asks something different. What happens when Peter Parker starts disappearing? By this time in the movie, Peter isn't just suppressing the monster. He's suppressing himself. Every excuse, every lie, every moment he refuses help pushes Peter Parker a little farther into the background. And eventually, there's nothing left to suppress, because the monster doesn't break out all at once. It emerges, one decision at a time. I don't think the monster represents rage, or violence, or even Peter's transformation. I think it represents something much scarier. A version of Peter who no longer believes he deserves to be known. Think about it. The physical transformation isn't what destroys Peter's life. The isolation does. Long before he loses control, he already cut himself off from the people who could have helped. He already convinced himself that suffering alone is simply part of being Spider-Man. That's the danger of isolation. It doesn't just separate us from other people. Eventually, it separates us from ourselves, because without other people, there's no one left to challenge the stories we tell ourselves. Peter keeps repeating the same lie. I'm protecting everyone. And because no one is close enough to question him, that lie slowly becomes his reality. Isolation has a way of doing that. It turns assumptions into certainty, fear into truth, and eventually, loneliness begins making decisions for us. Peter doesn't lose himself because the monster is stronger than he is. He loses himself because he's been fighting the battle alone for too long. And that's the tragedy. Spider-Man has always believed, with great power comes great responsibility. But somewhere along the way, Peter started believing responsibility meant solitude. That if he was hurting, he should hide it. If he was afraid, he should bury it. If he was changing, he should deal with it himself. But that's not responsibility. That's survival. And Peter has been surviving ever since Aunt May died. The monster doesn't win because it's stronger. It wins because Peter never lets anyone else into the fight. I think that's why this movie affected me more than I expected. Because it reminded me that isolation rarely destroys us overnight. It happens slowly, quietly. One conversation we never have. One emotion we never express. One person we push away because we think we're protecting them. Until one day, we wake up and barely recognize ourselves. But maybe that's also where Peter's story begins to change. Because healing doesn't begin the moment the monster disappears. It begins the moment someone finally walks into the darkness and reminds us that we were never meant to fight alone. Part 5. The courage to be known. If isolation is what slowly broke Peter, then healing could never begin with defeating the monster. It had to begin with letting someone in. That's what makes the final act so powerful. Peter doesn't suddenly become fearless. He doesn't stop worrying about the people he loves. He doesn't magically overcome years of grief. What changes is something much smaller and much harder. He finally stops believing he has to carry it all by himself. Think about Peter Parker for a second. He's never been afraid to sacrifice himself. That's easy for him. He'll throw himself in front of a train, fight aliens, risk his life for complete strangers. Peter knows how to suffer. What Peter doesn't know is how to let someone suffer with him. Because those are two completely different things. That's why MJ matters so much in this movie. Not because she suddenly solves Peter's problems. She doesn't. She can't. But she reminds Peter of something he's forgotten. Love isn't about removing all risk. It's about choosing someone, even when the risk is real. Peter spent the entire movie making decisions for MJ, assuming he knew what was best, assuming she would be safer without him. But real love doesn't control. It trusts. It says, this is who I am. This is what I'm carrying. this is what could happen. And then it gives the other person the freedom to choose anyway. Connection doesn't eliminate pain. It gives us someone to carry it with. That's something I'm still learning myself. It's easy to convince yourself you're protecting the people you love by keeping your struggles to yourself. I've done that. I've told myself I'll figure it out. I don't want to burden anyone. I'll deal with it later. But later has a way of becoming months, sometimes years. And by then, the thing you were trying to protect everyone from has quietly become a part of you. Peter believed asking for help meant putting other people in danger. But maybe refusing help was the more dangerous choice all along. The monster was never defeated by strength. It was defeated the moment Peter stopped hiding from the people who loved him. Because monsters grow best in the dark, but healing happens when we're finally willing to be seen. And I think that's what Spider-Man Brand New Day was trying to tell us all along. Peter Parker's greatest enemy was never the thing inside him. It was the loneliness that convinced him he had to face it alone. Peter spent the entire movie trying to save everyone else, but the one person he never thought deserved saving was Peter Parker. And maybe that's why his greatest enemy was never another villain. It was the belief that he had to face life alone. Conclusion. When I first walked out of Spider-Man Brand New Day, I wasn't sure how I felt. I enjoyed it. I thought it was probably Tom Holland's best solo Spider-Man movie. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Where was the villain? Where was the Green Goblin, the Mysterio, the Vulture? And then, the more I thought about it, the more I realized maybe I had been asking the wrong question. Because not every battle needs someone standing on the other side. Sometimes the hardest fight we'll ever face is against the lies we start believing about ourselves. Peter believed the people he loved would always be safer without him. He believed asking for help made him a burden. He believed that if he could just suppress the parts of himself he was afraid of, everything would eventually be okay. But pain doesn't disappear because we ignore it. Fear doesn't disappear because we bury it. And loneliness doesn't protect us. It isolates us until we slowly forget who we are. Maybe that's why this movie resonated with me more than I expected, because I don't think Peter Parker's story is really about superheroes. I think it's about something almost all of us have experienced. The moment we decide, I'll handle it myself. I don't want to burden anyone. I'll be okay. Sometimes we say those things because we're strong, but sometimes we say them because we're scared. And I think there's an important difference. Strength isn't pretending you don't need anyone. Strength isn't carrying every burden by yourself. Strength isn't suffering in silence. Sometimes, the strongest thing we can do is let someone see the parts of ourselves we've been trying so hard to hide. That's why I don't think Peter Parker's greatest enemy was ever the monster. The monster was only a symptom. His greatest enemy was believing he had to face life alone. We all have things we'd rather hide. Grief, shame, fear, anger, regret. We all have our own version of Peter's inhibitor, something that helps us get through the day without ever asking why we're hurting in the first place. But healing doesn't begin when the pain disappears. It begins when we stop pretending we're the only ones carrying it. Maybe that's what Spider-Man Brand New Day was trying to tell us all along. The greatest responsibility Peter Parker ever carried wasn't being Spider-Man. It was believing he had to be Spider-Man alone.